We did talk a lot about our resources earlier, and this is just a final reminder about a couple that we think are great that we want to reiterate to you. Pack Pros, as Courtney said, is all virtual, great videos, great activities on a Moodle site. Students register and they get all of the content about how to get ready for that career fair. So career fairs were virtual. Are they coming back in person? Yes and no. So just like everything else in the world, it is day by day. We're getting back to our international programs. I was talking to my colleague, Julia Kaiser, who took a bunch of students to Prague, and 30 students, the flight got canceled. Anyway, 3 days later, they got there. I'm thinking about doing some international internships with students again next summer. So day by day, we're all figuring out the next step to take. And with Pack Pros, we're giving students the opportunity to do that all virtual, and then they can get their certificate and they can go to that career fair that may be in person or maybe virtual again. We used Career Fair Plus. Some of you may have heard about that for all of our virtual career fairs for the last 2 years. It worked out great. Some companies love that. And they're saying, I do not want to fly anywhere or park on a campus again. Our interview rooms have been quiet. We're wondering if people are coming back, so stay tuned. But what we're going to do in Pack Pros is make sure our students know all this stuff about how to get ready for everything. And I talked to you earlier about the new headshots they can get. I know some of you may have come a little bit late, but we have our photo booth coming for that. So yeah, all that content. And then ePAC, of course, that is the job search database. So Ask the Pack is the networking, build your connections, get advice database. ePAC is the database where students can get in. And Courtney really did a great job of talking about this earlier. All the on-campus interviews go through here. We have our ability to make appointments in here. We have all of our events happening in here. And students can post their resumes in here as well. They can post their profiles. A couple little best kept secrets in ePAC that I like: when you log in, go ahead and look at Going Global. Like we said, the virtual world is now becoming in person again, and we're going to other countries again. Going Global has an amazing database to help students who may want to work in another country in an internship or job understand what the culture is there, how to write the resume there, how to find a job there. And that is an outside vendor. And the only way you can access that is by logging in to ePAC. You can also get administrative access to ePAC. So I'm going to have Courtney pop in Eddie Lovett's email address. And if you would like to message him after the session and say, we attended Career Champion, we would love to have the faculty administrative access to ePAC, he can give that to you so you can dig into Going Global and you can find information out as well about what your students see when they go on to ePAC. So Eddie kind of handles all of that in our office. So I'll just put his name in here and he will pop up in your Google Mail. All right, good. So that is ePAC. I don't think there's anything else I need to say about that. I'm going to pass the mic back to Courtney for career first aid.
So before we give y'all out for your lunch break, we want to talk a little bit about career crisis. We did a shorter kind of like half-day training last year on career crisis and career first aid. And we wanted to be sure that we incorporated that into what we are doing today, because we think that so many times what advisors, faculty, staff, grad students, or what we see on campus is students will come to us when they're at their end of their rope, when they're in what we call a career crisis. So how do you work with those students? We've told you about a lot of our resources earlier today, and then the rest of the day is really going to be focused more on some skills, techniques, and tools that you can have in your arsenal when you are going to be having these conversations as a career champion, as someone that students know, I can have these kinds of conversations with this person. So what exactly is it? What is career crisis? I think it's really important to have a definition for what you're talking about to really understand what it is we're looking at. So what is it that defines a student in career crisis? You're going to see an increased level of anxiety and distress, specifically due to a change or a lack of direction in their career or major decision-making or preparedness that indicates a need for support and intervention. The key here really that is career crisis is this student has increased level of anxiety and distress and needs intervention. They need some kind of support in this moment. And usually that is caused by a specific event, a specific revelation. It is something that caused this particular situation to escalate to a point that we would consider it now a crisis. Now this does not mean that that student is a danger to themselves or others. This is not a mental health crisis. They may go hand in hand. And with that in mind, I do recommend, if you have not already, please, if you are working with students, go through the mental health first aid and QPR trainings. I think it's really important for all of us who work with students to be aware of those mental health challenges that students are experiencing. That 2/3 number comes to mind again. I think it's important for us to know how to support and refer our students in the case of mental health and career crisis. Career crisis is different. It is, a student may be perfectly healthy and well otherwise, but they are experiencing specific anxiety and distress around the career exploration planning process. So that is what defines that career crisis. And Marcy, thank you. And Donna, thank you for putting those QPR and mental health first aid links in the chat, because I think that is so important to the work that we're doing. So one of the things I just want to open up really quickly is, in chat or, in vocal, what kind of career crisis have you seen? What kind of events do you feel like have preceded students coming into your office? What do you see?
Realizing they can't pass the coursework.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely the one that I had. Kristen?
I teach resumes and cover letters in the communication for engineering and technology course. So I have juniors who are majoring in engineering who are realizing that they're graduating in a year and they maybe picked the wrong major or the wrong area of engineering or whatever the case may be.
So I maybe didn't pick something that was right for me. Donna?
Similar to that, a student went and did an internship, and during their first summer, and they came back and they go, "Oh, Donna, I really I hated it. What do I do? What am I going to do now? I invested. They think of sort of the cost, the sunk cost. I've invested a lot of time in that, and it's all wrong for me."
Yeah, Chris.
I mean, something very similar to Donna, but I had a person that was a student worker that was working with my team, and really actually was enjoying IT. And this person was a PhD student and had at that time, that's a lot of sunk costs. I mean, he was having a pretty big crisis at that moment because he had spent so much time and all of a sudden realizing that what he wanted to do was something different.
Yeah. Sometimes those crises come later, not just during undergrad. Sometimes they can be, I have all these degrees in this one area and now I've found this other thing. Sometimes career crisis can be coming from a good thing. I really found this thing that I love and I love it more than my major even. Now what? I see Linnell says they can't make a decision. They're overwhelmed and it's typically due to mental health, anxiety. 100%. There's so many choices. How do I make the right choice? We have FOMO. That's a big thing. Angela.
Oh, I have a student who coded into the program from another program and just came to me at the end of the semester and goes, "I'm dropping your class because I want to code into another program." So like, you just started this your freshman year and you're already in 3 different majors. I need you to kind of let's talk about what's your goal, because it seems to be you're going to go from major to major to major, and that's not going to be attractive to a company.
So me being me, I'm like, career identity is perfect for a student like that for sure. So I think these are all really good examples, and they align with what we also see. So the types of students you might encounter in a crisis. We know about the foreclosed student, those students who come in with, I'm going to be this, and then for whatever reason, that doesn't work out. A student who is overwhelmed, whether that be because of undiagnosed mental health or diagnosed mental health, or just there's a lot. I'm seeing more and more students coming in. If you think about all the resources that they have, we are humans. We are not designed. We were not evolutionarily designed to have this much information to process, really. So when you're thinking about, Focus 2, internet, they have the internet at their hands at all times with these devices. It's a lot. So they get overwhelmed. Students who are indecisive. Well, I like this, but I like this. How do I choose? Career or major changers. We cannot in this conversation forget students who are, non-traditional students who are coming in making a career change. They can also find career crisis because of these things. The underprepared student. Underprepared for whatever that might be. Maybe they are graduating from engineering in a year and realize I haven't done internships or co-ops and I think I might be in the wrong area. They're underprepared moving forward. Maybe they're underprepared and they can't get a job because they don't have enough experience. There's a variety of ways. The inexperienced, similar to that. A student who's struggling. We do know that a lot of mental health disorders don't manifest until those early 20s. So students who come may be coming with no diagnosis and then find out they need that. They're now seeing STEM gaps from high school due to COVID. Gaps. They can't make those decisions. We also have to remember our first gen and under-resourced students. They may come in career crisis because they don't have the same supports. They don't have the same resources. So coming in with that idea as a first gen student of doctor, lawyer, teacher, and then realizing, oh, wow, there's a lot more things. There's so many reasons that a student may come into your office in a state of crisis due to career-related topics. So this is just getting an understanding of who these students are. It can be anyone. That's the first thing. It's not just first gen under-resourced. It's not just undergrads. It can be anyone. It can be us. We can experience career crisis. I think that's important to remember too. Any of us might experience this. But the important thing is being able to figure out, okay, what was the cause of this? What brought on the crisis versus what we'll talk about later, which is a career curious student. Career crisis is different. These are the types of things you might find. So what can contribute to that? We've talked about this. Failing a critical class. Chem 101, first semester, got a 32 on the first test. Well, obviously, I'm not meant to go to med school. Now what do I do with my life? Low GPA. Students can have a low GPA for a variety of reasons. External pressure. My parents want me to do this, but I want to do this. That is a huge problem for some students. That can lead to a crisis in a lot of ways. CODA difficulties. I want to CODA into engineering. Maybe you don't have the GPA or the engineering success score for that. Got to kind of figure that out. A lack of knowledge can bring on a career crisis. So not knowing what the options are, or finding out a lot of the options all at once, which can lead to that overwhelm. But simply just not having the right information for a student can sometimes bring that on. Imposter syndrome is a really important one to consider as well. I have students who are in really rigorous majors, rigorous programs, who will talk to me and be like, I'm struggling and nobody else in my major is. I feel like I'm the one who can't get it together. I don't know what I need to do. But the reality is, and we know this, all of our students are struggling with something. Whether that be coursework, managing, all of their different activities, they're all struggling. But that imposter syndrome of I'm not blank enough to do this is really a big thing that can lead to that career crisis. Lack of information or role models. Once again, if you've got a first gen student, do they have individuals that they can say, oh, this is somebody that is a role model for me. This is an aspiration that I could have. If I don't have those role models or that information, I may struggle to really envision what my career might look like, which could lead to that anxiety and distress. Information overload. There's all these different concentrations even in my major. Which one do I pick? How do I manage this? I don't know. Not knowing where to start. Not liking a major, not liking classes. And this, I find that this one is one that's very delicate, because a student could have a bad experience in one course and then be like, oh, well, I don't like sociology because I didn't like that class. Well, there's 3 billion flavors of sociology, and it could just be you maybe didn't gel with that professor. That doesn't necessarily mean that's not the right career path for you. And Sarah brings a good question up, or thing as well. Pressure of making the perfect choice is, you know, this idea of the perfect choice. There is one correct choice. We know that's not true. Students there's varieties of majors that could be a good fit for that student. There's literally hundreds on that career list in Focus 2, which helps them understand that. Brian also says we see several international students who are in majors that were decided by their families. Families will only pay for certain degree programs, and so that's something else you've got to be culturally competent in your work. Considering, you know, a student may come in career crisis. That doesn't mean that you want to tell that student, oh, well, yeah, you should change the major to the one that you love. Maybe not. That's something where, you know, a more in-depth and career counseling kind of conversation should happen. That's where that referral can be really helpful. Because there are so many pieces that make these complicated situations. My family met this weekend and I will be a pharmacist. Okay, well, how do you help a student in that? What is the correct thing to do? I think that's a really complicated situation. And that's where, you know, us having some of the skills we're going to talk about later can be really helpful. Offering options to the student, but not necessarily offering advice so much. Fear of making that wrong choice. Job search difficulties. Okay, well, if a student is a senior and they're doing a job search and they're not having any luck, if they're applying to lots of positions and getting interviews but not getting offers, that can lead them to career crisis of a different type. It's not just about choosing a major. Now it's, I'm in crisis and don't know how to secure a position. Financial and basic needs struggle. Maslow. If a student can't meet their financial needs, their basic needs, how on earth are they going to be able to then try and think about their career, for whether that be job search, choosing a major, etc. There's all these different pieces. I think it's very important to keep these in mind. Sarah, I completely agree. This idea of the amount of options that are out there, it creates an illusion that there is a perfect choice. It's you know, like I said, there's one right major for me. There's so many majors out there. There has to be the perfect one for me, and it's my job to find it. That's a lot of pressure, because if I make this wrong decision, once again, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of time. Jennifer, like, students want to be vets since they were little, and then they need to have conversations with their family. There's all these different pieces. And one of the things I want to kind of say here as well is it is not expected that y'all are career counselors. Some of you are trained in counseling, some of you are not. I think it's really important to know that this is where knowing your skill set, knowing your practice and scope of practice is really important, because there are things we're going to teach you no matter what your level of experience is with counseling. There are some skills we're going to teach you to help you work with these students and get them to those resources, which is why we cover those resources earlier in the day, so that you have a framework for when you're doing this work of, okay, I know this student is having this problem. I already kind of have a handle on some of the resources that could be appropriate and helpful for them for career crisis. Because here's really what our students want from us. They want us to give them the map. They want us to give them direction. They want us to say, okay, well, here's what you should do. No, we can't do that. It's not right for us to say, here's the road you need to take. Because they're the one driving on that journey. They're the one driving the car. We can be the GPS system to kind of let them know the different routes they might take to get to certain places. We can tell them about different spots on the map that sound interesting, that might be a highlight for them. We can tell them, oh, looks like you got a flat tire. Here's the resources you need to help with that. But we are not taking the wheel for them. They want that. They want to take their hands off the wheel and say, you know, instead of Jesus take the wheel, it's Courtney take the wheel. And that's not what happens. And I think that that's really important to explain to students, that when they're in that career crisis, they are in that moment of, I'm taking my hands off the wheel. I can't do this anymore. It's fight, flight, or freeze at that point. And that's what I want us to kind of leave on. So that's where career first aid comes in. Career first aid is a model that is based off of the psychological first aid or mental health first aid, which is an evidence-based practice in the mental health field. It's very similar. So career first aid starts off with contact and engagement. So the student comes into your office, they are making that first contact, you are engaging with them. So you are getting that kind of connection. Your second step is safety and stabilization. This is really important because first you need to determine, okay, is this a career crisis? Is this a mental health crisis? Is my student safe? Because as I mentioned, sometimes that mental health aspect is really playing a big part in why this is a crisis. Safety is very important. If we can't address safety and that stabilization, then we can't get to this next step. This is where I feel like that mental health first aid and QPR training can become really important. I cannot impress upon everyone the importance of being comfortable in speaking with your students about mental health and about suicidality, because we have the chance to really help a lot of students. So be comfortable asking those questions. Once you've determined the safety and stabilization, if a student is not safe, then career first aid ends. It is no longer career that is the focus. It becomes safety, stabilization, mental health first aid. But if you have determined at this point that the student is safe, you're able to calm them enough, then you go into the third phase, which is information gathering. We're going to talk about how to do this. Information gathering is where you're trying to understand the situation. There are a variety of ways to do this, but get the information of why is this student in crisis? What has brought them to this point? The fourth step is practical assistance. So what is the most immediate need for this student? What is something practical that we can give them now? Because what you know is that with career first aid, it is much like physical first aid. If someone needs stitches, and you have a first aid kit, you are not giving them stitches. You're putting a Band-Aid on it. That's what you're able to do in that time frame. You're able to stop the bleeding, put pressure on it, do what it is you need to do in that moment to get them safe, or at a point where the situation is under control enough that they can then be referred to whatever they need to do. So it's not doing stitches. We're not setting bones. We're not doing surgery. We are just stopping the bleeding. That is what I really want you to take away from this, is that career first aid is not full counseling. It is not full career answer all the questions, solve the problem. That's not what this is. This is get them to a point where they know what is next in the step. So practical assistance. Is there a resource? You know, practical assistance does go with number 5, which is connecting them with resources if that makes sense. So knowing those resources we talked about this morning, which ones make the most sense to connect them with? What supports do they need? So if you know that this student is struggling maybe with their choice of major, and they really need help with CODA requirements, and they're thinking of changing outside of their college. We know academic advising programs and services is a great resource. So this is not just career center resources. When a student's in career crisis, it can be a lot of resources on campus that they might need. So what makes sense there? And then number 6 is creating a plan for next steps or follow-up. When a student's in crisis, it may be the case that anything you talk about might just overwhelm them more. It could happen. And you know what? That's okay. That's why follow-up is important. Following up with that student and saying, hey, I know we talked about X, Y, and Z. How's that going? Creating a plan. So if that student, you know, if it's one actionable item, if you have a student who's coming in and they're unsure about their major and you determine the best resource for them is career identity. So you'd let them know your next step is enrolling in the career identity program. And then your follow-up is a week later. You ask them, hey, how are you doing? I wanted to follow up on our action item. That is career first aid as a model. Now that's long. I have a terrible memory. So I like to make things easy to remember. And this one's kind of funny, but easy to remember. RIP. Not rest in peace, RIP. So if you remember nothing else, when you have a student in crisis, remember this, rest in peace. And what that stands for really is rapport information plan. That is a simplification of career first aid. Your first step is going to be developing rapport with the student. So using micro skills that we're going to talk about in a minute to build a genuine connection, to have a safe space for that student to be able to process what it is they're experiencing in the moment. Career crisis is heavy. There's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of pieces to it. We've talked about that. It could be family. It could be personal. It could be mental health. Your first step is just to let them know, hey, I'm here. I'm here with you in this. That second, the I, is for information. Using open-ended questions, active listening to get information about the situation and their needs. So first, you build the connection. Next, you gather the information. And that last step is the plan. So providing practical resources and creating a plan for follow-up. Rapport, information, plan. Much easier to remember, but still the same general process. And you'll have access to the slides to have both. But this to me is a great way to think of when you have a student that's in career crisis with you, these are the 3 steps you want to remember. First, I build the rapport. Make sure they know that I genuinely care and want to help them through this. Information gathering, so finding out the information I need to be able to help them, and then creating a plan with the student. Not telling the student what they need to do, but creating that plan together so that they feel like they have that involvement and that, you know what, I have control over this. They may feel out of control about a lot of things. Giving them control over that next step can be that first thing that helps them get back into the groove of having that control. So RIP is your kind of go-to for a career crisis student. So we mentioned the first aid kit. So we're talking about career first aid. What exactly is in my kit? You want to make sure that you're prepared. When you're packing for a trip, you want to have your first aid kit ready. All the things you might need, you want to have them ready to go rather than kind of having to look for them or did I pack, this one thing I needed? What are those tools that are in your kit that we want to make sure that you have today going out into, working with students? So one of the first things that we are going to talk about is counseling and coaching micro skills. So micro skills are small things that you might do that you already do them, but you don't necessarily think of them in an intentional way. So these 3 things that we focus on are attending, listening, and questioning. These are all a part of counseling training, coaching training, but also just an advising training. These are all really important skill sets to have and to be using in an intentional way when you're working with a student, whether they're career curious or career crisis, but career crisis especially. So when we're looking at these, what do they look like? Attending is really exactly what it says. Are you paying attention to that student? So eye contact. This one's a tricky one because if you're in virtual, how do you give eye contact? Well, you look directly at your camera right here so that it feels like they're actually being seen. Now that means you're not actually looking at the student. And sometimes that can be, you're going to go back and forth between, but attending, giving them eye contact when appropriate. Vocal tone and speech rate. So if a student is talking to you about something where they are really hyped up, they're very stressed out and they just start talking and they go like this because they're really stressed out. And if this happens, then I'm going to do this. And then my parents won't do this. It can actually be helpful for you to ask them questions in a softer and slower tone because humans naturally try to match. So it can bring them down. Also, it's going to show that you're there with them. You're setting the energy. You're setting the tone. You want to make sure that your vocal tone and your speech rate fit the situation. And you can use your vocal tone and the speech rate to actually give weight and importance to what you're saying. Your body language. So are you open? Are you Leaning forward, are you engaged? One of the things we talk about is counseling posture almost. It's open body, lean forward, kind of engaged with them. That's harder to do once again virtually. If you're meeting with students virtually, sometimes that just looks like, maybe you have your hands up a little higher than you normally would so they can see what you're talking about and that you're a little more animated. You lean in, you're not just sitting there stiff. Mirroring is something that I think is really interesting and that we also naturally do as humans because we're social creatures and we want to fit into the group. So if you're in a group and the majority of people are sitting a certain way with their legs crossed, you actually naturally will cross your legs to mimic that. And that's a part of mirroring. But if a student is sitting a certain way, maybe with their legs crossed, if you kind of do that same thing, it triggers something in our brains to say, yes, this person is with me. They've got the same energy, the same vibe. They're on the same page as me. So sometimes mirroring healthy body language that the student is doing can be good. Now, if a student's sitting there with their arms crossed and they're all tense, you don't want to mirror that because you're setting that kind of tone. But you can example a healthier, more open body language for that student. Empathy is super important. One of the things we always talk about is unconditional positive regard in counseling. So if someone is telling you something and it's really intense, you don't necessarily want them to know if you are having a reaction to that. You want to, if they've chosen to share something with you, you want to react in a way that is, wow, thank you for sharing that with me. Not, that's deep. If you're uncomfortable, if that student's in career crisis, it's not about you. It's about you being there for them in that moment. And that's what empathy is. It's really making sure that you have your stuff under control to be able to be present with them, no matter what that means. Because if they've chosen to share something with you, no matter how uncomfortable, that means they trust you and that they're willing to talk through that with you, which is a great thing. And the last one is minimal encouragers. A lot of you have been doing this today, which I appreciate very much. When you are listening to someone, we naturally will nod when we agree with something or when we have connected with something. If you smile at someone, you say, or oh, little nonverbals and verbal minimal gestures that kind of keep the conversation going or give that feedback that I'm with you. So that unconditional positive regard, if somebody says, I have been struggling lately with a lot of anxiety about my major. Sometimes a minimal encourager will be like this, like, it doesn't have to be like a happy, but it's like, I see you're struggling with that. It's the nonverbals and the small things that really can show that you are attending to what they're saying. You are present with them. So that's the first part, attending, a part of your toolkit in your career crisis first aid. Next is listening. Active listening is hard. It is listening, but not just listening to respond. It's listening to find out more. It's listening in a way that is also kind of questioning, but not so much. Active listening is different. So some of the techniques that we talk about with active listening are encouraging, which is, could you tell me more about that? So it's encouraging them to share more. That doesn't have to be that typical, can you tell me more? It could be, oh, so you mentioned you really liked chemistry class. What did you like about it? That's more of a questioning, but it's still encouraging them to share more. Paraphrasing. I love this one because eventually students are like, oh, you're just asking me questions and I don't like that. So if someone has just went on this really big, students are in career crisis, if they're feeling highly anxious, they will talk a lot sometimes. When that happens, you can paraphrase everything that they just said in a, 3 to 5 minute spiel. You can paraphrase it down to the simple meaning of, you don't feel a connection with your course material in this major. If they're talking about just not liking the classes, you paraphrase what they've just said, and that lets them know, they're following what I'm saying, which is good. Summarization is a little bit different than paraphrasing, because paraphrasing, you're looking specifically at the content they said. Summarization is specifically kind of looking back at one point. Paraphrasing is big ideas. Summarization is, after exploring several majors, it sounds like you really have an interest in psychology. You're summarizing what they're saying or a specific point that they are saying. And then reflection of feeling, I think, is one of my personal favorites. It's taking this entire thing that you've just heard and putting a feeling behind it or a meaning behind it and seeing, this is a great way to see if you are on the same page as them. Like, that sounds really frustrating. They're like, yeah, and then they'll keep going, or they'll talk about the frustration rather than the actual, I've been trying to CODA and I can't get in, I'm struggling with this class. Well, that sounds frustrating. Yeah, it is frustrating. And then they'll get into the emotions behind it, which can be helpful sometimes in getting at the bigger picture that you're trying to figure out maybe what's going on. That's really great for the information gathering. So listening is not just hearing, it's taking in and analyzing what they're saying and being able to give that back to them to let them know that I'm not just sitting here in this room with you, I'm really with you. Any questions about attending or listening so far? Okay, we will move on to questioning. Questioning is actually, I think, one of the easiest and hardest parts of career first aid, because there's several types of questions. There are closed questions or closed-ended questions, open-ended, and then clarifying questions. Closed-ended questions can be really useful sometimes for information gathering, but they also can be difficult if you have a student who is either resistant or is just, you know, they're very much if you ask me, I'm going to give you an answer and that's it. I'm not going to give you anything else. So, do you like chemistry? Yes. Is that as helpful as what do you like about chemistry? Which is going to elicit more of a response from them that will be more useful for the conversation. So closed questions do have their place. Have you looked at X website with this resource? Yes or no? That has a use, but closed-ended questions tend to be a little bit more, they can leave the conversation at a dead end. So I always think about how can I phrase something in an open-ended way? What aspects of your coursework do you enjoy most? What's something that you think about when you think about the life you'd like to have after NC State? And then clarifying questions are making sure you're on the same page or that you understand something that the student has said. So if a student says, well, I like problem solving. Okay, but I want clarification. What types of problems do you enjoy solving? Or you said that when you applied for your engineering CODA that you were concerned about your success score. Could you tell me more about that specific concern? That's clarification, that's digging. Clarification is really making sure that, you know, you're on the same page as them. So questioning is really the bulk of information gathering, but one of the things that I think is really important to remember is going back to that idea of the student has the steering wheel. We are there, but when you're driving, how often does your GPS actually speak up? It'll speak up sometimes, but really it's mostly driving. So you want that student to be able to put into the GPS where they're going. You want to be able to give them nudges of, hey, if you're wanting to get to point B, you may want to take a turn here. You can reroute, but we give little nudges, as we talked about earlier, in that career crisis kind of situation. Questioning will then help you determine what resources and steps need to be taken in the RIP for the plan, which is the last part, which is helping you figure out that. And when we're talking about planning, I love the way that Marcy talks about parallel plans as an option for students. It's really important. So Marcy, if you would be so kind.
Yes, while we're on this,
Kind of look like this very straight line. They're expecting a highway. And what they don't realize is the highway has a lot of exits and crossroads and all kinds of stuff going on. So it can be really helpful for those students to have parallel plans. So we have this idea that students are going to be planning for one destination, But just like a GPS, whenever you do Google Maps, there's usually 3 or 4 routes it gives you as an option to get to that place. And we also know that students may have alternate destinations in mind too. So just because they are planning to get to a career in, maybe they want to be let's say a computer engineer, they want to work specifically like at Cisco. We'll say they want to do IT at Cisco. We also know that maybe they are also interested in doing, IT architecture at another company. So having those parallel plans and letting students know that this path to your career is going to look different. It's not just a straight line, and helping them understand that they are allowed to plan and should plan, in fact, for multiple potentialities can help them to avoid the stress of a traffic jam, or, if there's a detour that needs to happen on the road, they're a little more prepared for that than if they just think, hey, this is just a highway that we're going to be riding down. And we like to call them, we used to call them backup plans. I think that's what a lot of you need to have a backup plan in case med school doesn't work out. That sounds like failure. We don't want students to think that, if they don't end up going to med school for whatever reason, that they're taking something less than, because that's not the case necessarily. They may end up in something that's even better for them than med school for whatever reason. So that's why we like to refer to them as parallel plans. That specifically, it is something that is just as good. You're doing them at the same time a lot of the time. Because what we've found is that students, when they are choosing a career path, are not really choosing one specific job title. That's not really possible anymore, because the job you may have may not even exist yet. But what does exist is these skill sets, these skills and activities and experiences that you can gain that are going to prepare you for a variety of fields. So guess what? The preparation you may take to work in IT at Cisco is going to be very similar and have a lot of overlap that if you want to do architecture at Red Hat. There's going to be so many similarities that you're doing parallel plans without even realizing it. But I think students are very much a part of this idea of, I need to know exactly what job title I'm going to have, and that's the only way I can prepare for my career. And we know that's not true. So helping them understand what the road potentially looks like for them, I think, is a really a key thing for our students.
Yeah, and I'll add in, Courtney, that was great. Thank you for handling that while we had a little tech issue here. I don't know what hit Pullen Hall, but we're back. We also I think that plan B makes people feel really a lot more like a failure. Like, oh, well, I didn't get into the law school I wanted, so now I have to settle. And that's kind of the other idea of just, a lot of you are advisors, you use appreciative advising, just a lot of, we're not here to drag you down or make you feel any worse about yourself because maybe plan A didn't come through. And also just letting them know some of these statistics that people change careers up to 3 or 4 times, have up to 10 jobs in their lifetime. And y'all, that number is going higher and higher with all the changes after the pandemic, that people are switching, shifting. They're not locked in to whatever they thought they would do from the beginning. So yeah, so now we have an activity, right, Courtney?
Yes, we